When Elizabeth I sat upon the throne of England, over in rural Ireland, Connor sat upon his own throne, not a kingly throne, not a regal royal throne, but the simple wooden chair of a farmer. And all things in Connor's life had been ordinary enough, unremarkable as things go, happy at times, sad at times, well at times, ill at times. All of the usual chopping and changing and toing and froing of an ordinary quotidian life. Until, that is, one midsummer's day, when two of the 4 cows which Connor possessed somehow managed to get out of the field. How they got out was always a mystery to Connor, for they hadn't knocked open the gate or jumped through the fence and knocked it down, for the fence was intact, the gate was intact, the other 2 cows were still in the field. But 2 of them had simply upped and gone. And Connor was a poor man. He was not in a position to afford to lose cattle so easily. So off he set, leaving his wife to look after the rest of the cows and the various other creatures of the farm. Off he set with his sturdy staff in one hand and his best boots on, and he walked and he walked and he walked and he followed what appeared to be the line of what he assumed was the 2 cows, the passage of the 2 cows, the occasional cow pat here and there, hoof prints in the softer parts of the soil. He wandered for mile after mile, until eventually the hoof prints and the cow pats petered out. But every now and then he would see in the distance, off to the left or to the right, off to the east or the south or the west, he would see what might have been a cow or even 2 cows on the horizon. Bearing in mind he had no telescope or binoculars or any such thing in that day and age with which to closely see what these shapes were. It was just a suggestion, a hint of cow in the distance. And so he'd go off in this way or off in that way. Mile after mile he went, and because it was Midsummer's Day, of course, it was a long, long time, and therefore many, many, many miles before the day began to grow dark. And when it finally did grow dark and he came to his senses and thought he really ought to be thinking about getting home, and his feet were aching and his belly was empty and his mouth was dry, he realised that he had absolutely no idea where he was. He was miles and miles and miles from home. How long he had been walking, well, he couldn't begin to imagine. He had set out in the early morning, and now it was late into the evening. How many miles could he have covered? How many miles could those wretched cows have covered? If he was even anywhere near them, they'd probably gone off in some completely different direction entirely. And he began to panic. He didn't know whose territory he was near. Was he safe? Was he not? The land was a difficult place in that day and age. You never knew what dangers you might be posed with. People turfed off their lands and desperate for money might set about you, or the English themselves with their soldiery turning up to wreak mayhem in the land. When he spotted in the distance a long, low hut, not quite a roundhouse, it wasn't fully round, but it was a long, low hut, sort of like a hall, like a meeting place, but ill-kept. There was moss in heavy clumps growing upon the thatch of the roof, and the wood in places looked as if it were rotting and ill kept up. But what else was he to do? And at first he assumed that maybe this was just an abandoned building, for there was no sign of life. There were no animals outside the building, as you might expect if this were lived in by farmers. There was no playing of music or laughter or singing of songs or any sign of human habitation. So as he approached this long, low building, he just assumed it was perhaps some long, long since abandoned structure. And it was only when he came within 2 steps of the door that he saw the glow of firelight flickering out from underneath the door. And he heard a murmur of voices, indistinct, hard to work out what was being said, hard to work out even if it were male or female voices, whether it were 2 or 3 or 4 voices. It was just a murmur, just a suggestion of voice. Plucking up his courage, he knocked upon the door. And at once the door opened, and there was an old man, ragged, dressed in clothes that had seen, well, better centuries, if not better years, and smelling as if he was well overdue a bath. But at once the man beckoned him in. Come in, come in. We've been expecting you, the old man said. And Connor was slightly amused. He was so far from home he couldn't possibly know anyone who lived in this faraway place. And certainly the old man didn't look remotely familiar. The man beckoned him to sit on a wooden bench at the wooden table, and the firelight coming from the hearth and a few candles dotted around the place showed him this thin, ragged old man with a strange look to his eye, a sort of a yellowish tint to his eye. And when the old man smiled, he revealed teeth better suited to some wild animal than to a civilized human. And coming from a back room, there emerged an old woman, equally ragged and unkempt, with wild hair and bits of straw and all sorts of things gathered about her, and again that rather ripe smell. And she too, as she sat down next to him upon the bench, smiled at him and nodded, and revealed a mouthful of quite alarming teeth. "We've been expecting you," she said. And Connor said, "Really? I'm lost. I've wandered along. Do I know you?" "Oh, no, you don't know us, but we know of you. And so we have been waiting for you. We've been expecting you." And Connor began to feel more and more nervous. "Will you not drink?" said the old man, and took a jug from off a shelf and blew some dust out of a cup and poured what might have been ale into the cup and handed it to him. It smelt acceptable. The tiny sip that Connor took it tasted quite nice. And he'd barely taken a second sip when there came a knock at the door, and the door creaked open without any word from the old man or the old woman. And there in the doorway was a large grey wolf. And in the wolf padded. Now at once Connor was to his feet, expecting the old man and the old woman likewise to be upon their feet, screaming and hollering as anyone would if a wild wolf walked into their house. But no, they just sat there and they nodded at the wolf, and the wolf bowed its head and nodded at them. And even as Connor watched, the wolf began to stand up and stretch, and its arms and limbs, its legs, began to turn and to twist and became like human arms and human legs. And the muzzle began to retract into the face, and the hair began to retract into the body. And even as Connor watched, open-mouthed and agog and very nearly in need of a new pair of trousers, the wolf became a man and nodded to him, a handsome young man, a strong, well-built young man, and took a seat opposite him, and Connor's knees went to jelly, and he flopped down heavily upon the bench, his mouth opening and shutting like a fish out of water, not knowing what to say. And then, before he could think of anything to say, or scream, or holler, or run from the building, there came another knock at the door, and the same scene repeated itself. The door opened of its own accord, and there sat a small grey wolf, and in it walked. And, well, Connor by this point had given up any expectation of normal reactions from the old man and woman, and you could scarcely expect the young man to react any differently than he did, simply to nod to the new wolf, as the old man and the old woman nodded to the new wolf, and the new wolf nodded back. And it stood upon its hind legs, and it began to stretch, and it began to twist, and it began to turn, and the muzzle began to retreat, and the fur began to withdraw, and the ears began to slide down into a normal-ish sort of size. And as Connor watched, and by this juncture definitely needed a new pair of trousers, a handsome young man, shorter, more slimly built than the first young man. He was a big, burly young man, but similar in look, similar in face and bone structure to the first young man, took his seat at the table. And the old father began to fetch more cups and lay them before everyone, and to fill the cups with ale. And the new wolf, the smaller built young man, said, "You have come at last, we have been expecting you." "Yes," said the first wolf. "Yes," said the mother. "Yes," said the father. "We've all been expecting you." And they nodded. And Connor said, what madness is this? What is this? I've never met any of you before. How can you be expecting me? What even are you? "Ah," said the youngest of the wolves, for they were all werewolves. "Do you not remember? Some 2 years ago, also upon a midsummer, you were out walking in the woods, gathering plants for the pot, when you saw a wolf cub trapped in a thorn bush, yelping and howling and hollering, for it become stuck with thorns here and there and everywhere, and was bleeding and looking fit to die." I remember that very well," said Connor. "And what did you do?" said the young man. "Yes," said the old woman. "What did you do? What did you do? Tell us again. Tell us in your words. What did you do?" "Well," said Connor, feeling both nervous and warmed by the mouthfuls of ale he had been taking during this account. For it was strong stuff. "I did what any decent person would do. I picked the poor little creature up, and I plucked the thorns out of its paws, and out of its back, and out of its sides, and out of its muzzle. And I tended its wounds as best I could, although I am no physician. And I carried it down to a local river that it might drink of the water. And then when the poor little thing was feeling better, I let it go, and it ran off into the undergrowth." "Ah," said the young man, "that was me. And I have thought of you every day since then. As I have grown into manhood, I have thought of you and your kindness and your compassion. And I have told my brother, and I have told my mother, and I have told my father your kindness, and they could not believe it. They thought I was mad at first." "Aye," said the old man and the old woman. They nodded, and the brother nodded too. "For it is widely known amongst our people that you humans are dreadful creatures, cruel and wicked, prone to all sorts of savagery. We have heard tell that you would kill a cub as soon as look at it." And all four of them nodded sagely. "We couldn't believe when our son told us," said the old woman, "that he had met a kind human, for we were sure that such things were the stuff of fantasy and dream. But he had the marks upon him from the thorns. We knew that part of the story was true, but we'd never quite believed the rest of it. But I told them," said the young wolf, "I told them that one day you would come back, for one good turn always deserves another. And here you are, lost and hungry and footsore and afraid, and we may feed you, and we may water you, and we may look after you through the night. And come the morning, I shall bring your lost cows to you." "How did you know I'd lost cows?" asked Connor. "Well, I have been following you for some little while, leading you towards this house, that we might help you as you once helped me." And the ale flowed, and soon a stew was served, a good decent stew. Connor didn't think too much about what might have been in it, but it was a good tasting stew. And with the food there came mead into the cups rather than ale. And long into the night they talked. They talked of the ways of the wolf people, and they asked him all sorts of questions about the ways of humankind. And they exchanged ideas back and forth, back and forth. They told tales, they sang songs, each of their own peoples and their own ways and their own lives, until the mead and the ale and the heavy stew grew full upon Connor, and he nodded into oblivion. And when he awoke, he wasn't sitting at a table anymore. He wasn't in a strange longhouse anymore. There were no people around him, or wolves for that matter, around him. In fact, as he stood, he was covered in bits of straw, for he had been sleeping at the foot of a great haystack. And he looked around him and he thought, I know where this is. This is familiar. And then it dawned upon him. It was the corner of one of his own fields. And he thought, I must have fallen asleep here and dreamt the entire thing. What a strange dream. I wonder what it might mean. And he made his way back to the main field where the cows were kept, thinking to himself, well, maybe it's a dream that the cows will come back to me. Maybe that's what it means. And when he got to the field where the cows were normally kept, there were the two cows, the ones that had not wandered off, the ones that had stayed put. Of the other two cows, there was neither sight nor sound. And he thought, oh, what a shame. It was just a fantasy, a wishful thinking dream, rather than a prophetic dream. The cows are not back. But even as he thought that, there was a mooing and a lowing, and he looked around himself. And there, coming over the hill, were 3 cows. Not the 2 he had lost, 3 completely new cows. With different markings, different looks, and bigger cows than the ones he'd had previously. And there were ropes around their necks. And the other end of each of the 3 ropes was in the mouth of a grey wolf, which padded down to where Connor stood, open-mouthed, realising his dream had been no dream. And when the wolf arrived, it let go the ends of the ropes, looked up at him and bowed its head, and turned tail and ran up, crossed the hills, through the fields, and disappeared into the woods yonder. And there, Connor now had 5 cows. His 2 original and these 3 brand new cows. And they were fantastic milkers. They gave the best butter, the best cheeses. Oh, they were wonderful, the best cream, such that his wife became the talk of the neighbourhood. People flocked from far and wide to buy the things that she made in the kitchen with the milk from these 3 wonderful cows. And they, in their turn, when they were put to bull, they had many, many children. And Connor and his wife and his family grew to considerable wealth on the profits they had from these mysterious and magical cows from the lands of the wolf people. He never again saw the wolf people, but he thought of them often.